Hi, this is the future of platforms. BroadWorks, Metaswitch, NetSapiens, and Ribbon. Is the future bright or bleak? The communications software landscape is evolving, and voice service providers need to understand the forces shaping the industry. I'm joined today by two expert panelists. We're going to discuss the future of major software providers and strategies for keeping your business competitive. I'm going to introduce our panelists, starting with me. I'm Mark Lindsey. I'm part of ECG for about 22 years. ECG has been providing technical staffing to service providers and major enterprises to do projects in the voice and internet service provider space. And I'm going to let our other two panelists introduce themselves. Andrew.
Hey everyone, my name is Andrew Ward. I'm the founder of Award Consulting. We provide technical services for small ILX and CLEX, and we have a particular specialty or expertise in Metaswitch platforms, because I worked at Metaswitch for 14 years before founding Award Consulting.
My name is Peter Radizeski. I'm with RAD-INFO. I've been consulting with service providers since 2001. I've helped about 65 ISPs launch some kind of VoIP. You can call me for strategy, sales, marketing, and go-to-market.
Great, welcome. But we promised folks that we would talk through some big platforms. The BroadWorks platform, now owned by Cisco, originally started at BroadSoft. Later, we're going to talk about Metaswitch, now owned by Microsoft, NetSapiens, which is part of Crescendo now, and then Ribbon as well. So we're going to be talking through all those, taking your questions, and I'm sure we're all going to be doing our absolute best to honor our non-disclosure agreements that we've signed with those companies, but also provide some useful and helpful information. So we are excited to have so many folks from the industry, representatives of these companies, as well as a lot of our clients here today. So as I said, be sure to send us your questions in the Q&A panel, and you can go ahead and start sending those questions if there's anything burning and you'd like to be sure and get at the top of the list. So let's get to start. We'll start today with BroadWorks, which is from currently offered by Cisco. And, I think there's a lot of question around BroadWorks, what the future is, especially as Cisco is rolling out WebEx calling and really pushing that as they've changed their pricing and their support agreements for BroadWorks service providers. This has made a lot of people ask a lot of questions. I think one of the interesting things that I'm seeing, and originally ECG did the professional services for BroadSoft initially to do some of those initial rollouts before they had a PS organization of their own. So we've been active with BroadWorks for a long time. We remember back when, using the interface that was developed in the late 90s. One of the big things that's really showed up as a big difference here is the big versus small providers, that they have a big interest in keeping customers like Telstra, British Telecom, Bell Canada, the Verizon One Talk line of business. They like keeping those customers satisfied, and that's where a lot of the product roadmap has been, is servicing those really super major service providers around the world. Whereas smaller service providers are getting some quality software, but kind of a different experience working with the Cisco organization in terms of features and roadmap features and visibility and things like that. One thing that we'll often bring up about BroadWorks is kind of the long-term expectation that a lot of the major service providers are making around BroadWorks. They're looking out close to 10 years in some cases of expectation of maintaining their BroadWorks infrastructure. Of course, things change during that time, but that really is influencing the way engineering is being done, and they're looking at the roadmap. Some interesting things have come out of the Cisco announcements that they've done internally to their employees related to the BroadWorks roadmap. There's a lot of talk about, AI innovation, better features for managing and using call content. That sounds really a lot like what you're seeing from the contact center community, where there's a lot of discussion around using AI-based tools in order to provide better services to customers, not just network operations, but actual better services.
So Mark, can I ask, it sounds like you're saying the BroadWorks roadmap is pretty strong. There is an investment from Cisco in new features. Is that fair?
Well, what they've stopped doing, I'd say yes. What they've stopped doing, however, is giving their customers kind of a good long-term roadmap the way they used to do, even when they were public, but back when they were BroadSoft Inc. So it really has changed. What you mostly get are expectations that are created by large service providers who sign contracts with Cisco. So that's one thing. There's a sort of input that we get from that. And then there's the things that they're sharing in their actual, somewhat future-looking plans. And then there's the things that actually are announced to employees, like basically within that organization, the business unit at Cisco, what they're planning to do.
In other words, they're not telling the smaller guys the same thing they're telling the larger guys, and they're and if you're a smaller guy on BroadSoft, it makes it harder to decide what you're going to do in the future and if you're going to stick to that roadmap or try something else.
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard to get solid data on that.
Also, it seems like from my experience with clients that have BroadSoft, there's been it's not just at Cisco, but there's been a rotating personnel almost everywhere. And so it gets hard to get the support because like when you're running it all, it's great. But now that you're reselling WebEx, you need an awful lot of input because you have zero idea what the features and how it implements, because you're not controlling that anymore. You're only controlling the voice calling platform, not the soft phone and all the other features, especially like contact center. You have zero control over that.
With with BroadSoft, and what's the dynamic there with because they have their own cloud hosted product that they're kind of competing to an extent against some of the other service providers. So Broad Cloud, I think it's called. How does that kind of dynamic work with hosted versus cloud hosted, and do they have a direct sales model? How's that impact everything?
Peter, why don't you take this first?
Okay, so so Broad Cloud used to be the BroadWorks that they hosted. So that would be stuff like Verizon uses a lot of that. They used it originally with VCE. Some of the other big telcos still get Broad Cloud because they're not running their own instances. BroadWorks is the instance that like the provider runs themselves, which they either like outsource to ECG, or there's a couple other firms that they can like push that out to if they don't want to run it anymore, because it's getting really expensive for smaller. Like if you have under 50,000 seats, this now becomes really, really expensive to run BroadSoft. And if you only have 50,000 seats after all this time, that probably wasn't a focus of your business anyway. So you've got a couple of $1 million sunk into a business that doesn't bring you a whole lot of revenue, but a whole lot of headaches, because if you're not a Cisco partner, a big partner, and you're only using Cisco for BroadSoft, the attention you're getting is a little less than what you would get if you were an entire Cisco shop and you were a gold certified partner.
Yeah, and the WebEx calling is the brand that's happening under Andrew, where it's a BroadWorks platforms plural, that are being used to offer that. If you go and look at like the Cisco booth at Enterprise Connect and look at their features, it's a really nice new skin on top of BroadWorks, and you see that when you look at the bug fixes and the product updates documentation. And the little bit of forward-looking things, the things that are coming in future releases. There's a lot that are intended to help the super major installations like WebEx calling or Telstra, sort of the big size. There's a lot geared around keeping those systems. Now, it's worth noting that the Broad Cloud brand name and the particular servers there do have an announced end-of-life date. And with the expectation that sort of the easy button path is going to be to think about WebEx calling. And so there's a lot of conversations around that kind of thing, where people built out something that was on an official Broad Cloud branded kind of structured infrastructure. Because WebEx calling and Broad Cloud are not quite identical. I was kind of glossing details there. They're not quite identical, but from a business sense, in principle, there's a lot in common there between basically you're trusting Cisco and the organization to provide the calling features there.
I will say, I know I tend to be negative, but I mean, they have added like over 400 features to WebEx, and it has been, you can't even keep up with the features they've added to WebEx. So it's like, and that, when you're adding 400 features in 4 years, you're not going to be able to talk about all of them. So a lot of people that sell it and even use it don't even realize the capability they have that they're paying for.
Yeah. Yeah, I manage a WebEx installation for a small business, and just to do support kind of manually. I'm one of the users of it on a regular basis, and there's a ton of capability that's really geared toward enterprises. So the fact that I know that they really want to make this work for Department of Justice, for example, they're building a lot of features out there for security, for controls, for management of the platform, that are pretty heavy duty. They're pretty robust. They've got a lot of great security controls. that are provided as part of WebEx. And so a lot of BroadWorks service providers, they really love that integration. They love having a really solid, collaboration platform that they can connect with WebEx for BroadWorks. And full disclosure, ECG does a lot of that, like building out those connections for organizations that have a solid BroadWorks team and operation, and they just need to do a solid integration with WebEx.
So I'm obviously not the BroadSoft expert here. So it sounds like in terms of the future being bright or bleak, we're leaning a bit more towards the bright side, perhaps particularly if you're a large enterprise or large customer, large service provider. On the smaller side, you maybe don't have a lot of control or support, but there's still a active development. Is that a fair summary from what you're seeing?
Yeah, I would say so. And I needed to check to be sure what's publicly announced here. So I was Googling right quick. But you look at a company like Momentum Telecom. It's there's a large BroadWorks infrastructure that's basically offering a wholesale platform built on it. And the lights look green for that kind of model. Now there's also our other friends at Alianza and Intermedia that are doing a similar kind of service product. Basically offering a wholesale platform, and you should talk to those guys to get precision detail on those. But they're doing something similar, but they're doing it with proprietary tech, basically software they own. And their Momentum's not alone in their model, but they're building off the BroadWorks product, and they've done the recent acquisition of G12 who's a NetSapiens provider. Because like everybody in the telecom industry, when you get to a certain scale, you really need options. You need some hedges and some different ways of offering your service rather than being only with one vendor.
That kind of brings us to the, who are you selling to and what do you need the voice platform for, right? Like if you're going to sell to enterprise or you're going to push UCaaS and CCaaS, then you need a different platform than if you're just doing digital voice.
Tell me, so say more about that, Peter. What are you thinking?
So like, if you look at the BEAD in the US, there's going to be $65 billion of government money putting into fiber. And
right.
That has to be 1/3 match. So you're talking about $1 billion going into fiber. So most providers are only concerned right now with residential voice. Right? They're going to put a lot of fiber in the ground. They're going to sell a triple play if they can, a quad play if they can, find a cell provider to work with. So the voice is really going to be digital voice. It's going to be residential voice. You also have 30 to 40 million POTS lines that are converting. So a lot of providers have all of their focus on really just simple stuff, not UCaaS, not CCaaS, but like, how do I sell single lines? If that's your business model, you don't need a UCaaS platform or a full stack platform. You just need, something a little better than an SBC.
And I think a lot of this fiber grant money, I think, has been a big win for companies like Alianza, who we mentioned in passing, who have a simple, cloud-hosted offering that they can easily, these fiber, companies can easily say, hey, oh yeah, do we have voice? Yes, we've got voice. We've got a cloud provider. We don't have to have any infrastructure of our own. And so that's been a big boon in terms of growth for Alianza, for example.
Well, in the industry, like if you go back to 2003 when VoIP started rolling out, a lot of VoIP providers, especially like NGT, which Comcast ended up buying, they did a whole bunch of stuff. They sold retail, they sold wholesale, they did partition switches, they did literally anything to get revenue to come in. And if you look at the pendulum swing, it went retail for a very, very long time, and now we're back to a whole lot of white label. Like most providers, even 8x8 white labels through Westcon in Europe. And RingCentral kind of white labels, they partner and their name is still on it in most places, but you got to take revenue where you're going to get it.
Yeah, it's really interesting you mentioned that NGT history, because that was a big deal. We basically have seen the idea of hosting your services with another company who's going to run it. There's a lot of migrations, in and out of NGT over time, and so migrations, maybe we'll have some we'll see if the audience has any interesting kind of migration questions down the road, but migrations have always been a part of what's happening in this space.
Well, I think just one more comment on the white label thing. I think one of the challenges you get if you have a single provider that's trying to go direct and do white label at the same time is that obviously creates channel conflict very easily. And it's I like the idea where you have service providers staying in their lane and rather than potentially competing with their customers, because I think it gets very complicated very quickly.
It does, but a lot of the companies would they partition it off. I'm in the channel, been in the channel for 25 years. Everybody complains about channel conflict. You only see it on really large clients. They're not going to fight you over a 25-seat deal. A 1,000-seat deal, yeah, then you better put your gloves on and get your wrestling clothes on and get in there and get dirty. But for the small stuff, the stuff you're selling every day, not really. And truthfully, I mean, like when you figure it out, like the average UCaaS size or hosted PBX size is 12 seats. Like everybody's always saying, let's go up market, but there's only 32,000 organizations in the enterprise space. And most of those, not for nothing, are going Microsoft because people that work there are certified in Microsoft.
Right.
So you're fighting in the SMB space, which, I mean, it's 23 million businesses. So it's not like there's not a lot to do, but most people don't want to be doing 10s, 20, and 12s all day long.
Yeah, and that's a good topic for us to maybe circle back to later if the Q&A prompts it.
One thing that came in as a note from the audience that's worth mentioning, it's caused a lot of discussion in the BroadWorks world, has been the change of licensing model. In the past, you bought perpetual license for one version of the software, and then if you paid maintenance, then you would you'd basically get access to the newer versions later. So as long as you kept up, and that was kind of the standard thing, which effectively meant that you were buying a fairly substantial cost up front in order, and then you paid an ongoing cost in order to stay up to date. They've changed that now into what they're calling a subscription model, where basically there's not a perpetual license per se, but there is an ongoing cost that you're paying for the license to Cisco. That's kind of ruffled a lot of feathers, kind of raised a lot of things. As on the engineering side, we see it as there's a great logic there, because you really do need to maintain maintenance. You can't run ancient software and expect it to be compatible with a PSTN provider who's having to innovate and change features and settings forever and expect to be able to kind of keep up in all the ways. But that migration from perpetual license over to a subscription model, where the service provider itself is on a subscription model with Cisco, that's really changed things. That made people kind of look around and look for other options and see what else they can do.
Yeah, and we've certainly seen people, looking at basically migrating away from BroadSoft to Metaswitch because, the licensing model changed, and they were like, well, the pricing is just really bad right now. So we've seen that happen over the last 5 years, say.
Right, you're right.
And again, you got that 25,000. If you're not at 20,000 seats, you've been paying for. Used to be able, back in the day when you bought BroadSoft, it was 10,000 licenses you had to buy. And if you went with Taqua, you can get down to 5,000 licenses if you bought your BroadSoft through Taqua. You've been paying for those licenses since like 2010. You have 14 years of paying for licenses that don't have anybody on it. It gets a little expensive.
Yeah. We should move on to our next.
Yeah, Andrew, I was going to ask if you could, start us off looking at a Metaswitch.
Yeah, sure. So, the brief history here is that Metaswitch started out with a class 5 soft switch, doing TDM and VoIP in about 2002-3 thereabouts, and had a lot of success. And then they built a UCaaS hosted PBX platform within that as well. And as of recent times, say 2020, it was a mature hosted PBX UCaaS product. Lots of great features, very stable, very widely deployed among, tier 3, 2, and 1 service providers. Then, as you mentioned at the top, Mark, Microsoft bought Metaswitch in 2020. And it was clear from the beginning that the acquisition was not really about the traditional switch product, but more about some of the 5G and VoLTE kind of technology that Metaswitch had been developing. And so since the Microsoft acquisition, it's taken a little while to kind of get a feel for where things are at. I think it's fair to say now that the kind of roadmap that we've seen from Metaswitch in terms of future development of the platform has been some enhancements to security, some architectural changes. the Metaswitch product group is part of Azure for Operators. So within Microsoft, that's all about getting more service providers to use Azure, more Azure cycles, more spend on that. And so the focus has been, okay, can we put Metaswitch in the cloud as an Azure application, and the different components of that. So in terms of feature roadmap on the UCaaS side, things have significantly slowed down, I would say. I think that's a fair comment. And then, recently we've got news about their desire for more people to move to Teams. It's clear that Teams is the future in terms of Microsoft's focus on end user clients. That's what they want people to be using on the enterprise. And so there's been a fairly big push recently from Microsoft to persuade service providers that what they should really do is become Teams resellers. And then, for the business side of things, resell Teams, and then you can be an MSP and you can earn money in other ways with services. But, voice, just be a Teams reseller is kind of their pitch. And commenting on that as somebody who's working with a lot of smaller service providers and traditional telcos, I don't think that's really a great business model for them. The amount of revenue you get from a UCaaS hosted PBX seat is very different from the amount of revenue you get from reselling a Teams license. So yeah, I don't think that's a great pitch from Microsoft, but I understand why they've made it. And yeah, that's kind of where we stand today. The Class 5 switch is a very stable, mature product. It works well. There's no hints of any kind of end of lives on that. On terms of the software, there are some hardware end of lives and so on. But yeah, whether it's still a good option for UCaaS hosted PBX I'm more skeptical on now, given the lack of future roadmap there.
We work a lot with the perimeter product from Metaswitch, and honestly, there's a lot of optimism around that. That's, they're really supporting that well. It seems like it's people love it.
Yeah, the session border control is a really, really strong product. Yeah,
they're doing really well in that, and it's kind of seems like my impression is they're in many ways they're kind of have a strong team, strong future, strong support for that. And potentially it's going to go there's a different level of brightness or darkness around perimeter versus the classic Metaswitch CFS EAS platform.
I think that's fair. I think the perimeter can be used in a lot of different environments, and there's lots of good tier 1 uses for it, and it fits well with the kind of Azure model, I think. Whereas, I think frankly, just Microsoft is so huge that the traditional Class 5 market is not really very exciting to Microsoft. Whereas Teams is, Microsoft's always been about the enterprise and selling to businesses, and so Teams is a very natural fit there. So Operator Connect and Teams Direct Routing, they're excited about that. But the traditional Metaswitch, primary products of CFS and EAS and so on, it feels like they're more in kind of maintenance mode rather than something that's particularly being focused on or invested in.
You got to remember too, Microsoft bought Nokia to get in the phone game and then had to sell it at a loss. They don't have a phone game. Their win with Verizon Wireless was great because they got Teams on a bunch of phones for Verizon, but they were hoping to do that with everybody, right? With T-Mobile and AT&T. And Teams is their soft phone. Their long-term game is to be on every single device as the soft phone. And they had to pick one. That's why, it's not going to be Max UC. It's going to be Teams going forward. And their strategy for sales has always been through partners, except at very large installations, which has always been off limits, and Microsoft sells that direct. And, there's 23 million small businesses. Go sell them Teams at 25 cents a month, right? So, you got to look where are you in the market? What do you want to sell? How much margin do you need, and how much headache do you want? That's really where we're at.
Yeah, and it's an interesting transition point. I think being an MSP is not a bad business to be in. You focus on your business customers and you say what they need, how can we serve all of their needs, how can we provide a holistic technology service to them, and that's fine and good. But it's if you have a big revenue stream existing from providing communication services, then you can't like switch overnight, and saying goodbye to that revenue is going to be hard, even if you were to agree with Microsoft and say down the line, ultimately this is who I should be. Getting from one to the other is a very painful transition.
Plus the skill set. Running an MSP is not the same as running an ISP or a telco.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the funny thing is, like, in the channel space, everybody's like, oh, the MSP is, that's our star. That's how we're gonna like ride to the sun. But in the US, there's about 62,000 MSPs. 85% of them do less than $5 million in revenue, and they basically sell to small business, very small business. They don't sell to mid-market and large. And that misnomer like throws everybody off. It's easy to, roll out teams for 10 or 20 users at a time. If that's your business and that's your cookie cutter. It's different if you're Presidio and all of a sudden somebody comes to you with 20 seats, you're gonna be like, can't do that. So it's like, who's your market? Where do you want to go? What do you need? And running an MSP is, again, like the technical knowledge you have to have goes from the phone all the way to the desk these days. It's like they expect you to know literally everything, and that's a lot of technology to know. That's a lot of skill set you have to pay for.
I don't want to sidetrack us too much, but I'm curious, Peter. I would have thought the primary benefit of an MSP was in small businesses. Like, if you're an enterprise, surely you have your own IT department. Why would you work with an MSP at all?
Well, what enterprises usually fill in skill sets they don't have with a larger MSP. So, they'll go to Black Box because they need techs on the road. They'll go to, Accenture at this point for cloud migration because they don't have cloud migration experience inside. Stuff like that. It's like, even for cybersecurity, like how many CCIEs are there? There's like, I think less than 40,000 globally. So how many security professionals are there, and can you afford to spend $300,000, $400,000 to have somebody, or is it easier to buy somebody partitioned? Right?
Gotcha. Thank you. That makes sense.
I think it's interesting how the viewpoint that Microsoft is bringing into the space. I got a fun opportunity to provide some training on SIP and RTP to some folks who were connected to Microsoft's PSTN calling operation. Basically, they're part of the team's world that interacts with SIP and other service providers and SIP gateway and things like that. And then work with how basically they're doing SIP. And it was actually pretty fascinating to see the infrastructure that Microsoft is organizing around teams, and for their interaction, they bring a different kind of viewpoint and philosophy than kind of any of the platforms. Even BroadWorks came from is basically a Nortel thought process, like in the basic logic behind it. Metaswitch came from a process of they needed to be able to provide something that was compatible in many ways to the switches that were being used in service providers. So Ribbon, obviously strong TDM, Nortel, direct lineage from Nortel. So there's these even Asterisk, you look at it, it's built from a kind of a classic PBX mindset. Microsoft did not bring that mindset to it, and they've been working on. I remember like Windows NT coming out with like a telephony connector, like Peter, you were kind of referencing that. They've always been trying to dabble over in this space, but they brought a different kind of mindset to it. So I think there's a lot of smart at Microsoft that they're bringing into this. I actually kind of look forward, and I hope that they're able to further integrate and bring more of those teams together. But I'm also kind of proud that a large proportion of the SIP competent people at Microsoft were trained by my company. So that's a fun thing. Hopefully we're influencing them for good, not evil. So we also wanted to talk about,
right?
We also wanted to talk about NetSapiens and Crescendo here. I know, Peter, you've mentioned having some clients looking at this. I've got opinions as well. I wonder if you could get us started here.
So I consulted for NetSapiens prior to Crescendo buying them, and I have a couple of clients that are on NetSapiens. It's a solid platform. They've been growing. They doubled since the pandemic, from like a little over 1.2 million to they're a little over 3 million subscribers now, which is a pretty good growth. Crescendo helped them kind of stabilize the financials because they're public, allows you to be able to go borrow money when you need it, which private companies have a lot harder time doing. allows you to keep your development cycle going and going. You know, they've had a couple of hiccups, but you know, they have a lot of white labelers that do a really good job of you know, like their biggest white label is probably SkySwitch. Then you got smaller ones like RingLogix and Virtue and some others that do a really good job of trying to figure out how they're going to make it different than just a plain vanilla NetSapiens rollout. And that really helps not only NetSapiens, that helps MSPs that are buying off of that white label platform. So, you know, depending on who you're selling to, you can, you know, shop around and see which white labeler is closest to where your market is.
Yeah, and I think if you're coming from the point of view and you're kind of ignoring the Microsoft claim that everything should just go to Teams, if you want to still have a hosted PBX UCaaS product, you know, it feels like NetSapiens Crescendo is, you know, the one that's still investing hard in this, is growing, is having success. Yeah, there are, yeah, as you said, white labeling. There's a few good people out there who've got, you know, white label products, even focused on kind of the rural ILEC space that we work in a lot. You know, there are folks out there like Gigtail, for example, who and Totally Digital, who are, you know, targeting those folks with a NetSapiens, you know, hosted product. You know, one of our main clients, Reinvent Telecom, has just launched a NetSapiens, you know, alongside their Metaswitch. You know, there's a lot of activity in this area, and they do have a, you know, a very active kind of partner space as well in terms of new products. So I'm fairly optimistic on them. I should disclose I bought some stock after their user group meeting last year, which then went up like 4 times in 6 months. I was like, this was fantastic, and then it went down again. So it hasn't been a, like you said, a roller coaster ride, but it's I'm fairly yeah, I've been excited to see somebody who's actually investing in the space and seeing growth. So
yeah, for sure. I think it's really valuable that they're providing an option that's they're happy to sell it to you. They're happy for you to build a service provider to run it, to support you in building out redundant infrastructure. That's all good to say. We had a sort of an illuminating session at the Cloud Communication Alliance meeting, and you know the folks from Crescendo were basically happy to recommend, like, well, you can either use Crescendo-based hosting, or for basically instead of running your own engineering infrastructure, or you can run it yourself. And they were actively supportive of, if you want to run an engineering organization, to run a platform, then they're happy to bring you on as a client. I think that's a real strength. It's a bright spot for sure, that it gives those options, like you said. I think I've seen something very similar to what you mentioned, Andrew, with service providers who are adding a NetSapiens platform alongside an existing platform, whether as a, you know, as a kind of having 2 options available, or in order to have complementary product categories, like Momentum and G12 are doing, that I mentioned earlier, where they have some complementary features. There's things that the platform that they acquired with NetSapiens can offer that allows Momentum to grow in ways that they don't have built out on the BroadWorks side. And so those are cool advantages that they have. We have another client that's rolling out an NetSapiens platform that's complementing. They have 3 others, really, and so they're adding that on as kind of another option. But there's a lot of excitement around growth on that platform, innovation and features, and we've seen really good things done with the NetSapiens platform. I will say, from an engineering perspective, you know, their viewpoint, their model, I really like a lot about their model, in the sense that you know, every time you get to start a little bit later in the race, then you get to leave some of the old assumptions behind and kind of bring in new ideas. And so, you know, one of the big things is that you can run a NetSapiens platform directly on the internet without a session border controller. And for those of us who kind of come from a world where, like, well, you've never put a Metaswitch CFS or a BroadWorks app server directly on the public unwashed internet. Like, you'd never do that. It's not meant for that. You know, you would never even let a customer device send a packet to that thing, because if malware is in the customer network, then it could, you know, directly launch attacks against your core server. That was the old kind of mindset. That's how you did it. And I really love that NetSapiens was developed from a mindset of saying, well, like, actually, we're going to make this thing secure and robust enough that you can put it on the internet. So it's intended to protect itself. You may not choose to deploy it that way. You may have reasons to bring in session border controllers, but you can if you want to. From an engineering perspective, I think that's a cool security mindset. I like that they're investing and thinking along those lines. I do think as implementers, as network integrators, you've got to think about, well, if you are going to go without an SBC, that changes some things. Things like the way you're going to do call recording or on external platforms, or integrate with a spoof call protection platform, or the way that you're going to implement StirShake. And a lot of those things were built around SBC assumptions, and so you have to think through those and kind of what's the right fit. You also have to think about how you're going to do your geo-redundant failover and DNS control, things like that kind of start to come to play. But I love that there are options. I love that you get to do that as a network architect, and it's been proven out. They've been running the platform successfully. There's a lot of growth and solid results, solid operations on that platform. So it's great to have that option available to network designers and business leaders.
So if you think about that, you brought up the whole the biggest decision you have to decide is, do you want to have an engineering organization, right? On our practice, we talked about that. So if you want to hit on that a little harder than you did a minute ago.
Yeah. So I just, posted a LinkedIn article about that. I think a big question is, what value is an engineering organization going to bring to your company? Is it, some companies, they would have voice service providers, you'd start up, and you had to have, in order to offer voice service, you wanted to offer, UCaaS service or IP PBX, hosted PBX service. You wanted to offer something like that. And the way that you got there was by building a platform and by building an engineering organization. If you're, but now at this point, you've got so many options, like the NetSapiens kind of, option there. Do you want to run it internally? Is that something that brings you value, to have an engineering organization to run a platform? Or are you primarily a sales organization, an integrator, a deployment delivery organization? Is that where your strength is? One of the things I just noted kind of from another industry was, one of the chief executives at UPS recently made a statement in a BBC interview that said, we think of UPS, they're a logistics, a package delivery company. And so I don't really think of them this way, but they said, Laura Lane said, UPS is an engineering company and a technology company at its foundation. That's not really how I think of the brown truck man. But, that's how they think of themselves, is that they want to be able to innovate. So they want to be able to solve problems. And so they're looking at things like, well, how do they manage emissions? How do they reduce fuel use and consumption? And they think of themselves as, well, we're an engineering organization. We should be able to solve this ourselves. And so they're investing in things like intellectual property and technology development. But that's not going to be every package delivery organization. It's perfectly okay to buy somebody else's vans and go deliver packages in a certain context. So UPS is going one way and other companies may go another way. I think organizations are going to need to think about whether they, do they get a thrill out of technology? Do new technologies availability, does that potentially make game-changing differences for their company? Or are they primarily focused on selling, maximizing sales of kind of the existing product? Are they good at solving problems, internally, technical problems? Or are they better at basically identifying limitations and then keep customers away from the limitations? Which direction do you want to go? Are you mostly focused on development, building out new things? Or is that where you're getting value, is developing new products, new services, new software? Or are you mostly focused on integrating and making good use of things that exist? Both of those can be great options. One of those is going to tend to lead you towards an engineering organization and having the value of having a platform to do it on. And other options are going to lead you towards, well, maybe this engineering organization, this platform is not really doing me that much good. I'm actually better at reselling technology that I'm acquiring from somebody else.
For BroadSoft, that was the original thing, right? Broad Cloud or BroadWorks? How do you want to do it? And Crescendo's doing kind of the same thing. And a lot of the smaller CLECs that got into the BroadWorks game did it because they wanted control and they wanted to play with the box.
Right.
And now they're at the roads where they don't get to play with the box quite as much as they were playing with the box before, and probably not as much fun when you don't get to play with the box the way you wanted to play with the box.
I think at the highest possible level, it all comes down to what value is your business providing that other businesses similar aren't. What are you doing differently? What is a reason for somebody to choose you over somebody else? Because we've had this conversation a number of times with our traditional ILEC service providers who, through the availability of nationwide directory numbers and through having, a Metaswitch, say, with a good solid UCaaS platform on, they say, hey, well, we could provide phone service nationwide. I'm like, okay, well, yes, but why is somebody who's outside of your local geographic area where you're well known going to pick you? Like, you've got to have something that you are better at, some reason why somebody's going to pick you as a service provider. And to this point, yeah, if you have great product development skills and integrations, that's fine. Maybe it's just you have great customer service. Maybe you're just really well known in the city that you work in. But knowing that and investing in that thing rather than trying to waste a lot of effort in producing hosting your own servers and having an engineering organization, which is exactly the same as everybody else's. Yeah, there's no point investing there. You should invest in where your strengths are, where your differentiations are.
Yeah.
Great point. Yeah, I like that you brought up the geographic locale, because that used to be a classic differentiator between telecom. I mean, that was the original monopoly structure, was like, we're going to have one incumbent in a particular geographic area. Well, there's a natural reason for that, because you've got to go, like, you have infrastructure and cables and phones that have to be, terminals that have to be set up and managed. So if that's your primary value add, that you're local and that you're in the, the metro, the Fort Lauderdale, Miami metro area, and you can get on site really quick, if that's your key distinctive, then do you really need to compete against all the service providers of California? Like, try to go nationwide. Is that really helping you, or are you just going to be really good about being, really strong in Fort Lauderdale? Is that your goal? And I think that's a great, that's a great thing, because honestly, people I think that's something I'm seeing at least in the small business side, is if they buy from a nationwide provider, then there is a sense of loss that I don't have a local. There's no local support. I can't see anybody face to face and get that kind of training or onboarding.
I'll give you if everybody remembers CBeyond, they were only in Atlanta, and they were a pain in the ass to anybody in Atlanta, because they took 15% of the business market. And then they went nationwide, and they couldn't duplicate that everywhere, because you dilute it as you get farther and farther away. And truthfully, I deal with a lot of providers, and they all want to go up market and over nation, and I'm like, can you just get like 5% of the market you can actually touch? Because that would be a humongous business. Instead, you have like 1% here and 0.1% here and 0.1% here, and that's a very undirected sales strategy.
Well, let's talk about Ribbon a little bit. ECG works a lot with Ribbon, especially on the enterprise SBC side. That's a solid business, the Edgemark product. And, really, I'll let you guys, talk about some of the history of Ribbon and kind of how they got there. I know Andrew, especially on the Metaswitch, customers often had kind of a decision to make there. But, one of the really bright spots I see on Ribbon is the session border controller business, both the core service provider session border controllers and also the enterprise SBCs. It seems like those are some really strong areas. They have a lot of folks that love their SBC products. I actually like it a lot. I like managing, working with the core Ribbon SBC. We're longtime, Oracle and Primita SBC fans. I like the Ribbon SBC as well. It does a good job for a lot of problems that you can throw at it. And it's also easy to get started on. It doesn't have the kind of the learning curve of a CLI based system only. But those SBC products seem to be a lot of where the bright spot is for Ribbon that I'm seeing. Maybe y'all could share some more about what else you're seeing on the platform side.
Yeah, I mean, the history here, as you mentioned, is, this is very much Nortel's, baby, right? So Nortel went bankrupt, but their technology got bought by, I think, Genband, which then got acquired by Ribbon. So this is, Nortel's IP coming through. And, in my world of the rural ILEX, Ribbon was or Genband before them was the main competitor to Metaswitch in selling those class 5 switches. And the benefit they always had was because they had the Nortel IP, they could interact with Nortel, kind of access side equipment to talk to the subscribers. So there was a slightly less of a lift to replace a Nortel switch with a Ribbon switch than there was to move over to the Meta. But yeah, I mean, today, I think my impression from talking to them at trade shows and so on is that they're all focused on fiber build outs. That's kind of where they're focusing now. I think probably the voice business is static. Obviously I like the Metaswitch platform more than the Ribbon platform. I think is better. But I don't really get the sense that they're focused, that much on that these days. They did have a kind of separate UCaaS product called Candy that I think they spun out, which, so they do have something there, but I'm not hearing a lot about it recently. And more generally, I think what we're seeing is that most of the providers here are kind of getting away from that, the the kind of TDM connectivity piece, which used to be the key to ribbon strategy. And so now we've got this situation where everyone still needs TDM connectivity to access the tandems if you're a traditional ILEC, but pretty much all the providers we talked about are saying you should use telco bridges for that. Telco bridges are, independent third-party media gateway manufacturer, and Metaswitch works with telco bridges. NetSapiens can interact with telco bridges. Some of these hosted providers, GigTel, Totally, whoever they might be. If you need a local media gateway, then telco bridges is the way to go. So you've got kind of this, the platform providers are moving away from that, leaving this one third party in the mix to kind of continue to provide that less sexy piece of technology.
I mean, that's kind of what the CPaaS providers do too, right? Bandwidth and Telequin, all that stuff. Like, I don't want to deal with 911, CNAM, all that stuff. Let's outsource it all to somebody else, and let me just worry about. But that's also the business decision, right? How much engineering do you want to do? How much do you want to have to deal with telco, and how much do you want to just go sell voice, and what kind of voice? And, I think going forward, voice is going to be mainly residential, with all the money going into fiber into the ground, the residential voice and POTS replacement is going to, so if that's where you're going, how do you do that? And, Ribbon, it's really funny because they pushed Candy hard when they bought it. It was actually Fring originally from Israel. And it was like one of the first mobile UC products. And it just, probably because they have like 4 silos at Ribbon, and now 5 with Edgewater. So they're selling Edgewater, they're selling SBCs, they're selling Nortel, they were selling fiber stuff. There was no focus on like pushing one product. So Candy got spun out, and then the company that bought them went bankrupt, and then another company came in and bought it for pennies on the dollar just a couple of months ago. So
well, Peter, I want to challenge you. You think that business voice is not going to be significant in the future? You think it's just going to be kind of the gradual decline of the residential landlines is where voice is going to be at?
I think that the focus for most service providers is going to be residential voice because of fiber to the home builds over the next 3 years. That's where the PE money is going to go. That's where everything's going to flow with it. You've seen UCaaS slow down. 8x8 had a negative quarter. Ring Central with their 27,000 global partners is only growing at 10%. Even the CCaaS space is, slowing down to 12%. So it's like, again, it comes back to where your business is, but I think most of voice is going to be driven at the vendor level and at the service provider level by residential. It's been heavy B2B for forever. That's why Microsoft has Teams, and that's why they're pushing it. But what do you do when you're selling fiber to the home, or what do you do if you're selling cell phones to consumers? And even that business is being upended, right? You see the cable companies are selling way more cell phones than the cellcos. So
go ahead, Mark. Sorry.
Well, I was going to sort of tag on to the same question, Andrew. So we're pushing back a little bit, Peter. I think I think you're right. There's a lot of connection there between the fiber build outs and being able to have the offering, even if it's a low take rate of the Resi voice. But I think there's still a lot of interesting things happening in voice. And obviously we need to distinguish between E164 voice, meaning it routes over the PSTN. It has a telephone number, E164 regulated voice in the United States, versus voice that we're doing like right now, Zoom calls and Google Meets and everything else in between. Like, that's happening. And it seems like the voice for business has moved away from using the E164 platform, dialing by extension. That's primarily not how most professional workers are doing it, although there is a contingent of frontline workers for whom the internal voice calling platform is super key. They don't quite need police radios, but they need something. They need to be able to call. So we're seeing that, and then we're also seeing kind of informal contact center, which is the fancy name for you basically have a phone. The phone on my desk is there, so customers who are outside my organization can call me at a predictable telephone number. And the challenge there is, of course, the rate of spoof calling and fraud calling and things like that are kind of eating into the value of that. So that becomes really difficult. But if your job is sales, you do need an incoming phone number to be able to answer. And so there's some informal contact center space, that kind of customer contact that's actually pretty active. I see a lot of use for that. But then you see some interesting things like, well, college professors, many of them don't really want a telephone number on their desk anymore, because that would mean they have to answer it when it rings, when some random person, then they're going to have a phone number listed on the university website. Like, I don't really want to do that. Like, I don't run a contact. I'm not available for contact that way. And so you are seeing evolution happening there. But I'll grant you the point for sure that, like, in terms of investment, it makes a ton of sense that when the government buys things, people tend to want to sell it. So,
yeah, I agree with you, Mark. I think that but yeah, as Peter said, the fiber rollout's definitely a huge factor. But yeah, while some businesses may kind of use Teams or something for kind of internal communication, I think anyone who's got any kind of external facing role is still going to need a phone number, and they might not use it as much. I mean, like I said, I'll schedule meetings not using the phone, but I want to be able to pick up the phone and call somebody, instantly at times, and you need a phone number for that, even if it's not used as much as it used to be. We should probably pivot to questions.
Yeah, we've got some great questions that came in, so we'll get through all that we can. We got at least 13, it looks like right now. So one is, what do you guys see as the future of SMS as it relates to UCaaS and VoIP services?
At the moment, it seems to be a mess, but there's a difference between SMS that's mass SMS and individual, I'm texting you directly, and that's booming, and that seems to be doing all right. It's the business SMS that's kind of a little messed up with regulations and who owns what, because a lot of we're going into election season, and SMS kicks in for election season, and that's actually been bought by an Indian company, the people on the campaign registry. So and Twilio's being sued for their campaign registry problems. So the individual SMS stuff still working. The mass market stuff, a little bit of a mess.
Yeah, I from a product point of view, I think SMS as being part of a contact center or any business communications, I think makes a lot of sense and is important. But I totally agree, the regulation side of things is pretty messed up right now, and somehow needs to be resolved because it's not helping anybody.
No, I mean,
I think there's an interesting, so I'm going to go to a different side of this, which is just SMS as an alternative. It's the universal instant messaging within the US in particular. So, I can't take my phone to Portugal and do reliable SMS with people in America, even over the AT&T network. But within the US, it's actually pretty convenient to be able to, when I know that I can text people as the same phone number that I call them at. There's some really cool things happening at Tango Networks, where they're basically providing they give you an eSIM, they let you set up your phone as basically a device on your VoIP platform. So we're testing this with our BroadWorks platform right now, where my iPhone is functioning as a device to our BroadWorks in the same way that I've got a Poly phone that's functioning as a device to BroadWorks. But one of the add-on features they add to that is SMS. So they've got the ability to do texting, and then there's message retention and discovery, and you can implement all the compliance things around it. As far as I can tell, on that, you can implement them all. So I think that'll be cool if basically we get that as an option, because there are a lot of people that I interact with where I can't really reliably message them through Teams or Zoom chat or Google Chat or anything like that. I don't really have a direct instant message, a convenient instant message setup, and we're not doing enough work together to join Slack workspaces or something. But being able to use SMS would actually be pretty handy if we could do that as just a business communications tool, one-to-one. But it's mostly not available right now. So I'm optimistic that basically making it available, making it more uniform, would add something. My phone number is SMS reachable through the Tango product, and so it just goes to my cell phone, and that's a pretty good way to get in contact with me. But if that doesn't really take off, probably in the US, LinkedIn messaging is going to be effectively the alternative for getting in touch with people as a kind of the de facto instant message. So another question: why mess with hosting your own BroadWorks switch or going through someone like Momentum when you can buy WebEx calling hosting wholesale hosted by Cisco and bring your own PSTN wholesale provider like Bandwidth or IntelliQuint? So what this question is doing is saying, well, is the WebEx calling product kind of sufficient to eliminate the need for kind of the other competitors, like running your own BroadWorks or Momentum? And I think it's an interesting question. I'll just start off saying I do think there are things that you sometimes can do with some controls of your own. I do have in my LinkedIn article, I mentioned how I spoke to a service provider who basically they saw one of their key values that they were adding was compliance controls, spoofing protection. They want to be the service provider that when you make an outbound call, they have the highest deliverability rate. So in the email industry, there's a concept of deliverability. How likely is it that when you send an email, it's actually going to reach somebody's mailbox and it's not going to get filtered out as spam or nuisance? Well, you have the same thing happening right now in voice. How likely is it that if we call our customer, it's actually going to ring their phone in a way that they're actually going to want to answer? It's going to light up. It's going to show our logo or whatever. And it's going to get there. And that's actually becoming one of the distinguishing things that companies are doing. And it's actually pretty critical. When your bank calls, you want to get that ring. If it's somebody who's spoofing your bank, then you don't want it to ring. And so it's kind of complex to make that thing happen. Newstar TransUnion is working on a product in that space, or they have a product in that space. So I think there are some things that you could do with the kinds of control that you have from running your own platform that you're not going to be able to accomplish by kind of the outsourcing with bring your own carrier. You're going to get some controls there. But I think there's some interesting space here. Do you guys have other opinions on, that variation, those versions that they're asking about in this question?
Sure. So 2 years ago, Cisco went to a couple of master agents and started selling WebEx Direct through agents, and they handle all the back end. They pay pretty well. I'm not so sure I want Cisco to be the one I have to call when there's a problem. Any more than I want to call Google or Microsoft, right? It's like, it all comes down to like, who's going to support all of that. Mm-hmm. And I think they're too big to handle most of the marketplace. So I'm not saying you couldn't do it. I'm just saying, like, you're going to have to be prepared for, dealing with a giant who's not used to 10-seat deals and answering the phone for that.
So the support, the support product itself is kind of what you're highlighting there. I think the support product and whether it's optimized for that size client.
Yeah, because Cisco's really not a service provider. Like, let's be realistic. They're not. They're a hardware software company.
Right. So another question, what's driving the success at NetSapiens Crescendo? How important is it for ITSPs and smaller CSPs to build their own brand versus resell Microsoft Teams?
So their success is based on the fact that they're one of the last soft switches that you still get to play with, right? And they're easy to work with, truthfully. And they love their customers.
We should probably name check Alianza in this and saying that Alianza is another company that is actively engaging and trying to sell into this space. But it feels like NetSapiens has been around longer, and they have a very technical user base. So in terms of you saying people want to play with it, like that feels like a big part of their ecosystem. So
yeah, they're like the way BroadSoft was back in 2005, right? So for smaller guys that want to like play with it, there's that, or there's FreeSwitch. If you just want to sell voice, then you go find a white labeler. You go to Alizania or Intermedia or somebody else that's going to white label it for you, or you can go to Crescendo and have them white label it for you. But their growth is mainly because they're the last soft switch that you can play with.
Well, there's a follow-up question. Let me put it to you, Peter. I think you'd be great for this. So NetSapiens makes a big deal about concurrent session pricing versus seat licensing. Does that distinction resonate? Will they provide more than you see digital voice, as Peter said? What do you think?
So there's a distinction between selling hosted PBX and selling UCaaS, a full stack UCaaS. Most businesses sell hosted PBX. They're just replacing the PBX. They're just replacing POTS, and they're calling it either UC or whatever it is they want to call it. That being the case, most of those workers aren't on 9 devices, right? Like, it's rare that they're going to be on a laptop and their soft phone, on their cell phone, and on a tablet. So you only really need one license in one device, and that works out very, very well. And the way they price it is kind of per device. So it does work out well when you're, selling to an uncomplicated deal. And that also appeals to their growth, but it also appeals to how most people sell this stuff. We're still selling, POTS, PBX replacement in most cases. So it works well.
And I think pricing in general is a big factor for the service providers. I mean, we talked earlier about, BroadSoft trying to move from a perpetual license to a, recurring subscription kind of fee. There's a lengthy question in here from somebody saying basically they want to stick on the Metaswitch because they like it, because the costs of other options are going to be more expensive because the newer providers are, basically making it more like a subscription, whereas the traditional providers, it was something you bought and then you owned. And so I think it's going to differ for every person depending on their situation, but the costs are going to be a big factor. And yet NetSapiens in this particular case, they found an angle on a pricing model that makes them, seem more affordable.
This is our contact information. We'd love to hear from you about our different topic areas there. Thanks very much, Andrew and Peter, for joining me today. Thanks to our large participant pool that jumped in, and for all the great questions that you guys offered. Thanks again, Peter, Andrew.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks for listening.